Ah, Vegas. Lot to unpack. Um, Let me start by holding my hand up. Mea culpa. I was not expecting a good race. Um, After looking at some of the track maps that were pushed out early, and even some videos of the sims when they were doing them, I wasn't, enthused. I mean, some street circuits can be good, but I didn't think this one was going to be. Lots of long straights, basically very little high speed corners. I just wasn't expecting a lot from it. Then after the, utterly farcical free practice, my expectations went further south. But I have to say, this race delivered. I don't know if I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and say it's the best race of the year, but it was close. And certainly aspects of it were probably the most exciting that I've seen since this year. The final laps were magic. The amount of lead changes that were genuine lead changes, not just flukes based on tires or whatever. It was really impressive. Similarly, even in the mid pack and in the earlier stages of the race, lots of drama, lots of lead changes, lots of favorites moving back, lots of you know unexpected moving forward. Just it had everything. It had a mix of everything. Um, Definitely awesome race. Last night I was involved in our local motorsport event and got home fairly late, and I actually considered recording it and watching it this morning because I was tired. Very glad I stayed up. Awesome race, without a doubt. Awesome race. Full credit where credit is due. All right. So let's start with some of the results. Red Bull, what can you say? Dominance again. Wasn't easy, but that is what actually is what we will say now, the mark of a team that is great. And that is being dominant when things are going your way is one thing. Being dominant when things are not going your way and you have to adapt is entirely on another level. And they have proved that they are able to do that. They work well when they're ahead and they work well when they're under pressure. That team, and I've said this before and I'll continue saying it until it changes, that team is on fire. It is unquestionably the best combination of drivers, team leadership, pit crew, strategists, all roll into one. They are on the ball and they are right. They are the benchmark, unquestionably. They are the benchmark for any teams moving forward in 24 and beyond. No question about that. Verstappen, good race. Penalty, I think, was deserved. It was fair. What he did definitely pushed Leclerc off. I don't think it was deliberate. I think even Leclerc might have been going a little wide even before he had to take obvious evasive action to avoid Max hitting him. I think because of how late they were both braking and because of how slippery the track was at that point, I think Leclerc would have probably ended up being a little wide anyway. In other words, if Max had been a little more conservative and had taken a better inside apex, he probably would have even gotten past Leclerc anyway. As it was, they both, he pushed wide, not really locked up, but just basically a four-wheel drift. I think it was probably just understeering to the outside of the corner, and Leclerc had to move away from him. It still resulted in Leclerc having to go wide off the track, and I think the penalty is fair. I mean, the FIA, well, they're not the FIA, the stewards are somewhat inconsistent when it comes to first lap incidents, much less first corner, first lap. They tend to be very tolerant of certain things at times and give penalties at other times. I think this one would have been 50-50 if they had given the penalty or not. But having given the penalty, I don't have an issue with it. I think it was fair. And I think Max himself in the press conference after I acknowledged that. He said, if he got a penalty, he got a penalty. He didn't have an issue with it. The after that with the penalty and the car just not working well on the mediums, he dropped back. Boy, started to put on a great drive on the hards. Um, Notwithstanding the even with the impact with George and losing the end plate, his ability to adapt to the situation, because obviously the car would have lost some downforce at the front. It probably started to understeer a little more, not severely obviously, but enough that it would have affected him. Yet he adapted to it and still went on to win. Fantastic result. This dude is the real deal. But clearly not having it all his own way. The margin wasn't great, and he had to work for it. No question, he had to work for it. This is a well earned and deserved win for Verstappen. I personally was cheering for Leclerc. I'm not gonna lie. I wanted Ferrari to win. Ferrari is my favorite team. Well, McLaren really, but I like Ferrari. They're okay, and I wanted Ferrari to win. I definitely did not want another Red Bull win. I wanted Ferrari to win. As much as I favor Alonso as an individual, as a driver, I definitely wanted Ferrari to win this. And I like Leclerc. I think he's a great driver. I think he, deserved a win to here, but wasn't to be. But he did his best. I'll talk a little about the team at the end in the summing up about what I thought happened there. But on track, brilliant driving. In fact, that pass that he put on Perez on the last lap was outstanding. Perhaps the pass of the day, and maybe one of the best passes I've seen in this year, because by that time his tires were really off. I mean, not necessarily off a cliff as in they're dead, but not comparable to what Verstappen and Perez would have had. And that late braking he did, I mean, when you watch the replay from in the car and you hear the downshifts and how he got the car to turn in without getting it locked up, that is literally on the razor's edge. I mean, he was braking late and just perfect braking, perfect downshifts, perfect turning line. I mean, that was a masterful pass by Leclerc. Absolutely. Right? So, fantastic race from him. Full credit where credit is due. Perez, I'm split on Perez. It's in terms of highs and lows. The fact is, after the first lap incident, he started basically last. So to come from last and finish third is an amazing achievement by any standards. And he did that on merit. He passed a lot of cars. I mean, this race had overtaking on top of overtaking and good quality overtaking as well. He passed a lot of cars, really did fantastically, kept his head when he needed to, strategized well with tire management, really drove an outstanding race. So that's a high point. The low point would be having gotten the lead and held it for a while with good tires. How do you manage to get yourself back into third? Yeah, I hear him saying about the wing and the top speed advantage, but with Ferrari. But honestly, you just feel like he gets things in his hand and kind of drops the catch, so to speak. You can't help but think if it was Verstappen that had been in that situation, he would have found a way to keep Leclerc behind him. We saw it with Alonso at in Brazil, I think it was. It's the same kind of thing. He kind of has a way of getting it and dropping it. I don't know. The jury is still out on him. I mean, the fact is he's now secured his second place in the championship. So Red Bull will be happy with that, unquestionably. I mean, this is their first 1-2. Good result. Can't argue with that. Is it enough for him to secure his place in the team? We'll see. I mean, I think I'm on record as saying I don't think he deserves that car. I don't think he deserves that place. Whether they think differently, we'll see. I mean, that's a commercial decision on their part. I tell you what, the Sainz made a really good recovery in sixth. You can't help but feel what could have been if what happened in the free practice didn't happen and the penalty and all of that, because he drove a really good race. What if look at how well Leclerc did? What if they had started 1-2? What could have happened? Does make you think a bit. But, it coulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, who knows. But definitely drove a very good race, I thought. Um, let's see. Russell, he's an ass. He produces good drives, but he's become. When you hear commentators who are who are notoriously Mercedes biased, in my opinion, and English centric, Anglo centric, or whatever the word is that they use. When you hear them start to say, boy, when in previous races as well, when somebody's catching Russell, they'll buy, boy, you have to make sure you pass him on straight, or boy, he's a difficult guy to pass, or boy, anything can happen when you're passing Russell. He's really developing that reputation. He kind of taking on this Ocon-esque kind of style where he's just so unpredictable when you're passing him. I thought that Verstappen made a good lunge. I thought it was late, but it was good. It was fair. And several other cars passed in that exact same spot, in that exact same way. I think Leclerc had a pass like that. I think Perez had maybe two. And there are probably a couple others as well that passed exactly the same way in the exact same spot. Russell, you have a guy like Verstappen behind you. You see him, you know he's there. You don't even glance at the mirror. I mean, I'll take it at face value that he didn't see him. And Max seems to accept that he didn't see him. But the question would be, why wouldn't you see him? Why wouldn't you be looking in your mirror? You have a fast Red Bull in the hands of Max Verstappen behind you, coming off of a straight, coming down into a corner. Surely you must be looking in your mirrors. Even if you don't expect a pass, you must be looking in your mirrors to see what the man is doing. Is the man going to test you on the outside? Is he going to test you on the inside? Is he going a little wide to set up himself for the exit so that you can maybe adjust your line to cover him on the exit? Whatever. You're going to tell me that you're so oblivious to what is behind you that you don't even glance. You just turn in as if nothing else exists. I find that ridiculous. And I really don't have any sympathy for him when it comes to the penalty he got. Hamilton drove a good race. I think the car is letting him down. I think Hamilton drove a good race. I think he drove steadily. I think he made the best of a bad situation. The contact with him and Piastri, I definitely would classify that as a racing incident, and then the resulting puncture he had to deal with. And clearly he wasn't happy with the tire degradation issues and so on. But I think he did well considering the circumstances. So I give credit where credit is due. I mean, he's a great driver. He has all the experience in the world. He knows how to kind of extract the best from a bad situation. What would I say? Gasly, Ocon, Alonso, those guys, they did very well, in my opinion. Gasly, I mean, the tire wear issue obviously bit him at the end, and Ocon was able to capitalize on it. I'm not a fan of Ocon, but he drove really well. Gasly was on fire, drove fantastically. I think the Alpine showed genuine pace here. Alonso, uncharacteristically maybe, screwed up on the first lap in the same spot. In fact, if you see how Alonso spun and what happened with Sainz, get kind of losing it and touching Hamilton and spinning as well, it shows you how slippery that section of the first corner was on the first lap. And it kind of puts the thing with Verstappen and Leclerc into perspective that I think a lot of people were kind of sliding around at that point. It's F1. It happens in the first corner. But Alonso made that mistake, set him back. Great recovery drive. Aston Martin both finishing in the points. I think that must be a huge plus for them, considering that the last race they had was great as well. So that's a lot of momentum that they're carrying now. But I want to mention Stroll in particular. I'm a harsh critic of him. I'm unapologetic. I've said it before. I don't think he deserves a place in the team. I don't think he deserves a place in F1, if I'm being frank. But that does not preclude me from saying, hey, well done. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. And today he was right. He drove very well. 5th place, well deserved. He didn't lock out. He did well to earn that place. He drove sensibly. He made a lot of good, solid passes on the track. I think the team's strategy was spot on with him, and it worked out. And he got a excellent, well deserved spot. I mean, at the end of the day, it was eventually he was last, I think, at one point. So you're talking last to fifth, That's impressive. I mean, by any standard, that's impressive. Piastri and Norris. Firstly, Lando probably lucky. I mean, I think he did actually go to the hospital after. Don't know if they've gotten further updates. I haven't heard any, but the initial thought was it was just for preliminary checks. I hope that pans out to be true and that he's not actually injured, because that was a hard hit and that was a high speed hit as well. Not something to sniff at. Street circuits have no, or often have very little to no runoffs, especially on the straights. The speeds are very high. I mean, the speeds here are comparable to big tracks like Monza and so on, where there's, if you lose it, there's lots of space on either side. When you lose it here, you are hitting something solid, and you have to be careful of that. And I think he was probably pretty lucky in that scenario. And obviously, I hope he's fine and ready for Abu Dhabi. Piastri drove a great race. I mean, 10th, it's points. You can't argue with that. And based on McLaren's current form leading up to this race, you might say 10th is a little disappointing, but I didn't think so. I think he did great. He passed when he needed to. He was strong. He, had a bit of a clash with Hamilton, set him back a little, probably had some damage. But at the end of the day, great drive. This dude is the real deal. I mean, I've been saying it and I'll continue saying it. He is the real deal. He can drive. Deeply impressive drive. No if, but, or maybe. Williams, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and even Haas, if you want to lump them all in. I mean, they all have their own stories, but essentially there is the same result. They started strong and then faded. Williams in particular, I think I probably expected a little more from them. I know they have their tire issues, which have always been there, and similarly with Haas. But because of the temperature, I thought that would have mitigated a little more against the tire wear. And it probably did. What I did not anticipate was the amount of graining, which has a similar effect in terms of how it feels in the car. And so I guess that was excessive and they couldn't process it. I think the safety car came at a really bad time for Albon in particular. And so I think he ended up staying out and essentially having to fight with people with newer tires than him. So you can kind of understand why that occurred, but I still had hope for a little better from them. Same thing with Haas. Haas traditionally has decent straight line pace and tend to switch on their tires quickly, which you'd think in the cold temperature it would suit them. And I mean, they had some decent back of the pack and midfield battles, but overall they just faded as they went along. Similarly with Alfa Romeo and AlphaTauri. AlphaTauri, I don't know what really went on there. Both Ricciardo and Tsunoda were pretty much nowhere. Considering again their recent run of form, I'm not sure what really is taking place there. I guess I will get some more information as we go along. But that definitely was a poor result considering where they've been performing lately. I'm going to sum up with a few quick points. Firstly, I'm going to touch back on the previous short video I did about the free practice issue that I had a problem with. I'm going to revisit it slightly. I think the FIA and the whole way the Concord Agreement is written. The Concord Agreement, for those who don't know, is the kind of governing, like articles of association almost, and memorandum of understanding that the teams and the FIA and the FOM all signed to agree on a set of rules. I think it doesn't work effectively when you require a unanimous decision from the teams. Ultimately, in racing, the tail cannot wag the dog. There has to be a point where the governing body has authority to step in and say, based on these circumstances, we need to make this change. Do you need to get the team's input? Should you get the team's input? Yes, absolutely. However, should it have to be unanimous? That's where I part company with them. I think once a team, even a single one, who has to act in self-interest, dissents on a decision, it should not be able to impact on everyone else. That's not logical. It doesn't make sense. I think that, for example, in this situation, basic common sense would tell you that the rules of force majeure, anybody who is in racing knows what force majeure means. When something affects someone that is beyond their control, you should not be penalized for it. That goes against every law of natural justice. What happened with Ferrari and Sainz specifically was unacceptable and was not their fault. And the fact that they got penalized for it, there cannot be a scenario where a rule enforces a situation that is unjust. There's something wrong there. And the fact that a team like Mercedes, it's not made official yet, and maybe it never will be, but you get I heard one of the Sky Sports people hinting at it, and these are notoriously pro MB people. And when you hear them say, boy, there was this one team that dissented, you don't have to kind of stretch your imagination too much to know why. Because obviously, Mercedes is second in the championship, Ferrari is third, and the gap is closing now. The fact is, whether Mercedes won, we can argue about the moral situation in terms of whether they should or not. That's irrelevant. I don't even care, because if the same going to apply, and I'm going to explain a little further with James Bowles and Williams. But the fact that one team, any team, it don't matter which one, can object to something and cause everything else to be, set back, doesn't make sense. The organizers or the rule makers have to be able to have authority. That's how motorsport works. It should work anyway. So I think that needs to be revisited. It manifested itself again with what I heard James Bowles say recently in a press conference about the Andretti entry, where he said, speaking in the interest of Williams, I can't favor that Andretti bid. Now, Andretti, in my opinion, is a team worthy of coming in. Certainly more worthy, in my opinion, than say a Haas. And frankly speaking, it wouldn't surprise me if they ended up being better immediately than say a Williams themselves or even Alfa Romeo, right? Yet, and bringing now with GM, I mean, the corporate value that GM would bring to the table is immense. Not just as an engine supplier, but just branding-wise worldwide. The fact that a individual team principal, because of the financial ramifications, it's not even real financial ramifications, the potential financial ramifications of diluting the pot from 10 teams to 11, will prevent him from voting in favor of Andretti. It tells you that there's something fundamentally wrong. When naked self-interest can supersede common sense and good of the overall good of the sport, there's something wrong there. The rules should never allow for a situation like that to happen. And so that needs to have a major rethink and revisit. I would say that Ferrari, I touched on it earlier. As much as the race was great with Leclerc and Sainz ended up doing well, I still think Ferrari needs to improve. Look at the pit stop. Leclerc's pit stop was 3.7 seconds. Verstappen's pit stop, even with the penalty, with a 5-second penalty, was 7.7 seconds, which means Verstappen's pit stop actually took 2.7 seconds, right? Versus 3.7 for Leclerc. There were a couple other 2-point-something second pit stops during the race from other teams. McLaren has twice now, I think, done 1.8 or 1.9 second pit stops and so on. What is Ferrari doing? Ferrari and Mercedes are screwing around. You can't be having those kind of slow pit stops. That don't make no sense. I'll give them a little leeway with the safety car and not pitting Leclerc, because that's a judgment call, and based on it's hindsight is always 2020. So I'll give them a bly with that one. But here's where I call it into question, even though I give them a bly in this case. The problem is that in too many situations where it's 50-50, they get it wrong. And that's the problem. It is convenient to say, yes, hindsight is 2020. I heard Leclerc saying that in the press conference, and I heard Fred Vasseur saying that as well in a different interview. But the problem is that when it's 50-50, and in most of the 50-50 judgments, you fall on the wrong side of the 50, then you have to, then it becomes a trend. So at that point you have to say, well, yeah, it's 50-50, but if you keep guessing wrong every time it's 50-50, then what, you're doing something wrong. So I still got to come down hard on them. um Ending with this, great race, had a lot of fun watching it. I say this unreservedly, I was wrong. It was a good race. Needs a fix up. I think a suggestion I heard from Fred Vassar about running a support race previously to it to kind of iron out the kinks was a good idea, and in fact was actually the rule a few years ago for any new venue. I don't know, I'm not even sure when it changed. Probably changed sometime in the 80s. Some promoter probably offered them enough money that they decided to run an event without checking it first. But that's a bad precedent, and I think that needs to be revisited again by the FIA. Seems to be a recurring theme where I say FIA needs to look into some of these things. I think a simple way of ensuring a circuit's suitability is to run a support race before it. I don't mean weeks before. In a street circuit you can't. Yeah, you just have a couple of hours window. Run a one, even as a touring car race or something. Or in America you have F3, you have US F3. Run something that can just kind of proof the track a little bit, make sure everybody's happy, and then you run the big cars. That's my view. We'll see how it goes. Looking forward to Abu Dhabi at the end, because Ferrari is now pretty close to Mercedes. We'll see how that works. That will be an interesting finale, I think. So let's see. All right.